Hi everyone, it's Sam from Sitemate. In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can use required fields to ensure that critical parts of your forms are filled out by your team. And there are some key differences between how this works for timeline templates versus workflow templates. So we're going to look at both of these in this video. But first, let's take a look at how we can actually specify which fields on our template actually should be required. So this is all controlled inside the template builder. So we need to click the Edit Template button, open up the builder, and you'll notice that whenever we hover on a field, we get this little box that appears up the top that says required. It's just a checkbox. If we tick it, it just means that in this case, with the timeline template, we're not going to be able to save the form without filling out this particular field. So as an example, let's select this date field up the top for this table that's tracking labor. If we hover over the columns, you can see that we can make specific columns required. And in this case, we're going to make sure that the start and finish time is required. So if we ever select someone's name, we're going to have to put in a start and finish time. And this question down the bottom for whether there were any delays, let's make that required, and let's make the signature also required at the bottom. So there's a couple of things there that are now required. We'll save the form. So let's try this out, and keep in mind that this template is a timeline. So if we add a form, the way that the required fields works is we can't save this form unless the required fields have been filled out. So we can see here that the date, it says it's required. These columns here, they say that they're required. The delay question and the signature also indicate that they are required. So if we tried to save this form without having filled out any of these required fields, it just shows up with some red error messages. So, and you can see on the form it's marked in this light red color, and the required text is highlighted. That we need to fill out these fields in order to save the form. Those fields are required. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's fill out the date. Let's pick someone from the list, put in a start and finish time. Were there any delays? No, there weren't, and we can sign it off. And as we go, as we're completing those fields, they're no longer indicated as with the red border around it anymore because those sections have been filled. So you can see now it looks like everything's sort of in the right place. And if we click Save, you can see that the form has now actually been saved inside of Dashpivot. So for timeline templates, it's pretty simple. In order to save the form, you need to complete all of the required fields. So now we're looking at a workflow, and the required fields actually function slightly differently. We know that with workflows, in order to move a form between the columns, it needs to be signed off. And ultimately, we want our form to end up in the last column of our workflow, working from left to right. And the way that required fields functions for workflows is we can't sign off those approval signatures to push the form from one column to the next unless all of the required fields above that signature have actually been filled out. There is one exception to this rule, which is if the form is sitting in the last column, all of the required fields need to be filled out, including the fields below the last approval signature. But we'll take a look at how that works. So let's open up the template builder. Again, none of these have been marked as required just yet. So let's go ahead and indicate which ones would be required. So let's put in the date. So you can see we've got these three fields, and then we have our approval signature, and then we have these two fields before the next one. So let's make the comments required, and let's make these closeout comments also required. And you'll notice that the difference here is that this field is below the approval signature. That'll be important in just a moment. So we can see that we have 1, 2, 3 fields marked as required. So let's go ahead and try this out. If we add a new form, all of the fields are still marked as required, as you can see. But they're actually only required in order to sign off the next approval signature initially. So we can, in fact, save this form, even though we have some required fields on there, but we're not going to be able to move this form through our workflow unless those fields have been filled out. So as an example, let's reopen it. And I'm going to try and click sign, and you see that it tells us that the required fields haven't been filled out yet. So we can't sign it and move it to the next column until we've done that. So let's punch in the date, and now let's try signing it. And it works just fine. So we can see our signature on there, the fields are locked, and if we save the form, it's moved to the next column. But there are still other required fields on the form. So you can see below that approval signature, in order to sign off the next one, we need to have this required field also filled out. So again, I can't actually sign it off until that's been filled out. So let's just say that the issue is resolved. Of course, if we were doing this properly, we'd be filling out the defect title, the photos, and everything as well. But now that we've filled out this required field, it allows us to sign it. But there is one thing that we need to keep in mind, which is in our workflow, we only had 3 columns. And so we only needed 2 approval signatures. But because both of them have been signed off, our form is now sitting in the 3rd column of the workflow. And the only way to save any changes to the forms that are sitting in the last column is if all of the required fields have been filled out. So we needed this field to be completed in order to sign it, but in order to save this form now, because it's in the last column at the end of our workflow, all of the fields need to be completed. So if we try and save this form, you'll see that it still tells us that this last field still needs to be completed. So let's fill that out. We can click save. And we can see that our form has now moved through to the last column. And that's how we can use required fields. If you have any questions or get stuck with anything or would like to learn more about Dashpivot, we have additional training resources available in our tutorial section online. We also have a live chat on the website, so if you get stuck or have a question, you can reach out to our team. And as always, thanks for watching.